Good evening. I'll switch this on. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Dundee Central Library. And on behalf of Abertay Historical Society, I'm delighted to welcome you to this launch of this year's publication, which is a book called In One Woman's Life, Celebrating Mary Brooksbank. Now, this book, it's a collection of essays, and we have most of the contributors with us tonight, but there's even more fascinating voices represented in the book. So you'll need to make sure that you do leave with a copy to get the full impression. And Mary Brooksbank is one of these figures who, if you're in the sort of circles where you know about her, she is an absolute legend and very, very well respected, but kind of outside of those circles, we really don't feel that she is yet well known enough, and perhaps she is not well recognised enough for her contribution across a number of fields in Scottish culture, to politics, to the folk tradition, and to the literature of Dundee and of Scotland more widely. So this book, it's been co-edited by myself and by Siobhan Tolland, who's over here at the other end of the row. And we would like to thank everybody who's contributed to the book, to Abertay Historical Society for so enthusiastically bringing it together. And also thanks to Connor Beaton, who has been really influential in making sure that Mary Brooksbank gets her due place in Dundee's culture recently. And we're just all going to say a very sort of brief 5-minute thing about the chapters that we've contributed, or read something from Mary Brooksbank. So I think I'm going to open by reading one of Mary's poems, and I've chosen this one because it's the poem from which the title of the book, In One Woman's Life, was taken, and it's called 1917, 1937, 1944, Mater Dolorosa. Up in an attic, lonely she sits, a figure pathetic, she silently knits. The firelight gleams on her snow-white hair, fond the dreams surrounding her there. Memories of babies dear, sweet lisping voices, never again she'll hear such gladsome noises. Footsteps of their father climbing the stair, at the window they gather to watch for him there. Swiftly time flies, soon babies are men, to the fond mother's eyes. Years are but days then. 3 soldiers' pictures hang up on the wall, familiar their features, they were her all. War claimed the father, in France he was slain, the dear eldest brother a victim of Spain. What of the youngest, last of that 3? Was he spared her dearest? Not even he. The desert's hot sands hold the dear youngest brother, death clenching his hands, his last words, O mother. O mother of sorrows, mothers of men, must our future tomorrows bring Calvary again. Politicians and rulers are richly rewarded, but in one woman's life is our history recorded. So now I'll bring up one of our other contributors to say a wee bit, and I'd like to welcome Mary McGregor. Mary McGregor was born in Stirling, but she's lived in Dundee for 47 years, and she's a retired English and guidance teacher, and was councillor for the Coldside area of the city for 8 years, and she was also the first woman leader of Dundee City Council, and this is something that Mary's piece touches on.
Hi everybody, it's really good to be here tonight. First of all, I'd like to say it was quite an honour to be asked to contribute something to this book, but it was also extremely daunting. I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic, and I'm certainly not a writer, but I have been a political activist all of my life. I have lived experiences which have been influenced by the legacy of Mary Brooksbank and others like her. Although we never met, although we could have done because she was still alive when I first came into Dundee, we're part of the same working class history and struggle. We're bound by the same beliefs and we're united over the decades by our desire to see a world free from want, oppression and exploitation. My wee contribution is a kind of personal political memoir, touching on the struggles that I've been involved in and I'm still involved in. I specifically focus on the Timex dispute, which had as its backbone a brave and determined female workforce, Dundee women, following the steps of the jute workers that so many of them were descended from. I'm going to read a couple of wee snippets from my contribution. First of all, from the opening. Finding Mary, a personal and political journey. And a quote from Mary Brooksbank, is culture and beauty for ladies and lords? Too often, political activists of my generation were encouraged to believe that culture, in its widest sense of literature, poetry, music, art, song and dance, was in some way a bourgeois deviation from the class struggle. Yet in the midst of all the horrors of life under capitalism, I would argue that it's our ability to be creative, our determination to sing and to dance, our capacity to laugh and to love, that gives us the strength and motivation to fight against a system which would sacrifice our humanity in the pursuit of profit. Then a wee bit from when I arrived in Dundee at university, feeling very much like a fish out of water. But I found a tribe of socialists and communists who taught me so much, and they taught me about Mary Brooksbank. English and politics, poetry and song, revolutionary songs, Bandiera Rosa, A Valley in Spain, Bella Ciao, Stand Up and Fight, and the Jute Mill Song. I learned about revolutionary women, Angela Davis, Rosa Luxemburg, and Mary Brooksbank. The essence of my political beliefs, confirming for me that culture and revolution are integral to each other, and that women are integral to the struggle, not on the sidelines, but as leaders, as inspirations, like Mary Brooksbank. Then a wee bit about the Timex women. They were feisty, funny, beautiful women who fought for their families, who supported one another, and who knew how to laugh and how to dance and to sing, just like their jute worker forebears. Then at the end of the dispute, it's remembered as a moment in time when our class took on the bosses and said we would not accept being treated as disposable commodities. It will be remembered for the solidarity and humanity of all those involved. It will be remembered for the voices of the women involved. I think that this commemoration allows us to remember the voices of women. Women who refuse to be silenced or sidelined. Women who carry on in the tradition of Mary Brooksbank. Women who will not be airbrushed out of the history books. Women who fight for our culture and fight for our class. Finally, Mary Brooksbank didn't just want to ameliorate poverty. She wanted to destroy the system that created poverty. And the last words that I say should be hers, because they're as true today as they were when she wrote them. There is no solution to the social problems that we see around us within the orbit of capitalism. Thank you.
Thank Thank you very much, Mary. That was a great opening to this evening. Now, I would like to get my co-editor, Siobhan Tolland, now. Siobhan is kind of the historical expert in this case, because she has a PhD thesis on the life and politics of Mary Brooksbank, which she completed at the University of Aberdeen in 2004. But she's also very involved in political activism herself, and grew up hearing tales of Mary Brooksbank from her father. So now Siobhan is going to come and share some more words of Mary's.
Can you hear me okay? One of the things that always fascinated me about Mary, and it's been touched on by Erin and Mary herself, is that combination between the creative and the political voice that kind of becomes fused together. And I think Mary Brooksbank does that really successfully. The chapter that I talk about in the book is actually about political performance, using things like the jingle ring and children's games as acts of political resistance. Is it not? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So the jingle ring and so forth in the mill strikes as acts of political resistance. But I'm going to go a slightly different take now, because when I went back to Mary, because it's been a while since I studied her and it felt like a kind of slightly different life, and when I went back and we talked about this book and I looked over it again, and one of the things that struck me, a couple of things struck me actually that I hadn't quite seen before, is the role of grief across her writings in her autobiography and in her poetry, as well as the role of hope within her writings as well. Erin has given a brilliant example, I think, of how grief touched her and how she represented grief and how she presented grief. I'm going to read a section from her autobiography, which I think is probably one of the most important chapters in her autobiography in this sense, and it's called The Concert. And what it is, I think it becomes, the grief in this chapter becomes the backdrop of her first creative singing performance. It's against that death that she sings her first performance. But as she says, and as she's reflecting on that, it also becomes part of the reason for her, quote, intense hatred for war. And as Mary herself has said, she mentions it as it compelled her to the serious study of fundamental causes. For anybody that knows anything about communist or socialist history, fundamental causes is code for capitalism. So I'm just going to read this, and it kind of gives a beautiful, I think, way in how the personal, the political and the creative combine together in our work. The concert. The concert. In a top flat of 18 Commercial Street at the corner of Exchange Street lived three pretty and talented sisters, the daughters of a building contractor. Miss Jessie taught the violin, Miss Bessie the pianoforte, and Miss Cecilia, the youngest, was a teacher at King's Road School. Miss Cecilia married and went out to India with her husband, but returned a year or so later to have her baby in Scotland among her own folk. I still picture the scene in that room over 50 years ago. The three young girls clustered round the happy young mother, clutching their violins and admiring the baby. I can remember the light shining on her mother's hair as she fondled her infant, and her voice as she said softly, "We're going to see your daddy, baby." Alas, the SS Persia was torpedoed and mother and baby were lost. I was but 17 years old and highly strung and sensitive. I brooded so much over the tragedy that I would frequently wake in the night screaming. My mother took me to Dr. Anderson in Princess Street, a very wise, painstaking and conscientious man. He prescribed no drugs for me, but pointed out that I was young and healthy, and that gradually time would ease the shock from my mind. But I would never entirely forget. Even as I write these lines, I can still feel the sadness of it. I can still see the wee pink face and the tiny hand clutching my finger. It did not open its eyes, but yawned inside. The Mrs. Sliders were very popular and had many pupils, and we were practising for a concert in aid of the Red Cross, to be held in what was then the Masonic Temple, but now a printer's establishment. My contribution was to be a tenderly beautiful cradle song, and I was not surprised when Miss Jessie decided that I should play Spirited Gavotte instead. I wonder if the hero who fired that torpedo won the Iron Cross. Did he have a wife and baby of his own? Did he, in the after years, give a thought to the people he sent to their doom? This tragic happening may have had something to do with my intense hatred of war. It did, I am sure, compel my thoughts to the serious study of fundamental causes. We rehearsed for weeks for this concert. I felt very proud to have my name on the programme. My supporters were out in force, my girlfriends, their brothers and friends. My mother had bought me a very pretty dress, a white voile with a blue waist ribbon. It cost £5.11 from Ewan's in Whitehall Street. I made a very shaky start, but carried on bravely, not wanting to let Miss Jessie or my friends down. The thunderous ovation that greeted my efforts was most embarrassing, to say the least, but Miss Sliders seemed delighted, and so I was a very happy young girl. Mind you, I have a sneaking feeling that the applause I received was as much a demonstration of loyalty from my friends as it was a tribute to my musical ability.
Thank you. I was just getting lost in that there. But I would now like to ask one of our other contributors, Emily Robinson, to come up and give us a bit of an overview of her contribution to the book. Emily has recently graduated with a Masters of Philosophy in Modern British History from the University of Cambridge. And she is also involved in the Republican Socialist Platform, the Radical Independence Campaign, and other feminist and socialist campaigns.
You'll have to forgive me, I am losing my voice somewhat. Thankfully it's not COVID, it's just adjusting to a cold environment when you're from the US South, so bear with me. In the spring of 2021, as postgrad research in women, feminism, and left-wing politics, I was fortunate enough to interview a small group of women, one of whom, actually two of them were on stage with us just now, classic, a small group of women active on the radical left in Scotland. Focusing on the relationship of Scottish women radicals to the feminist movement in the Thatcher years, I set out to piece together an unheard narrative of communist women working undercover to disrupt the feminist movement. But rather than something so cinematic, I uncovered something much different and much better. I heard the stories of women who were disenchanted with national politics, who knew better than anyone that the revolution they so desired would not start in Westminster or, latterly, in Holyrood, but in their neighbors' homes, at their local libraries, and in their workplaces and schools. There are few well-remembered women of the Scottish left, though each sect and split has, typically, reified a woman or two that nominally represents their politics. There are few who have risen to the status of such vaunted figures as, of course, Rosa Luxemburg, Alexander Kollontai, or even Angela Davis. Despite this, there are few better Scottish candidates for universal praise than Mary Brooksbank. Though Mary died just before the start of the 1980s, still cloaked in relative obscurity, because she dedicated her life to ring with brilliant salience throughout the life and work of so many Scottish radicals who came after her. Mary Brooksbank had, for the 5 years between when I moved here and when I began my research, been something of an esoteric historical figure. I knew there were one or two monuments acknowledging her in Dundee, and certainly I'd heard the Jute Mill Song spoken of with particular fondness by ex-CP members. Yet, on the whole, her life and struggle felt as relevant to my own as did that of the Bolshevik women of the early 20th century. Ideologically of a piece, but emotionally and psychologically, very different. But through the research I'd undertaken, I was introduced to Mary's life in far greater detail through the PhD dissertation of one Siobhan Tolland, classic. Her dissertation was concerned with Mary's forthright gendering of Scottish communism, and through that, I felt and found a life that felt viscerally, uncomfortably familiar, not just compared to my own, but compared to the lives of the women recounted in the chapter in this book. If there is one way in which the spirit of Mary Brooksbank's life is preserved, it is in the left-wing women of the latter decades of Scotland's 20th century. Unlike Mary, they were by and large not confronted with two calamitous global wars, but rather by the no less devastating reality of deindustrialization and post-war financial capitalism. Systematically disempowered in both the domestic and national economies, these women, like Mary before them, turned to the radical left to wrest back control in a rapidly changing world. And they, like Mary, faced opposition to their commitment to the emancipation of women from both within and out with the organized left. This historical parallel, embittering though it may be, compels us to ask an unspoken, though not novel, question. What does it mean to be a woman and a radical in a world where capitalism and patriarchy are two fists of the same oppressor? And for those who attempt to straddle that line in their own lives, how did the women in whose footsteps they now walk answer that question for themselves? Caught between the rock of gender justice and the hard place of radical politics, left-wing women struggle to effect a demasculinization, or an altogether degendering, of Scottish communism. Nearly every woman I spoke to experienced their own variation of Mary's expulsion from the CPGB, but, like Mary, none marked it as the end of their time on the radical left, and, like Mary, they reoriented towards local campaigns. Rather more significantly, all of the women in my chapter continue to vocally and proudly identify themselves with radical politics. Though they articulated periods of great distress, alienation, and occasionally outright desolation at the relationship between the left and the concerns of women, all continued to assert their commitment to radical politics. The woman I spoke to insisted upon a vision of communism that was entirely unlike the staid, hyper-masculine orthodoxy of mainstream radical politics in Scotland. They, like Mary before them, refused to allow institutional obstacles to impinge upon their commitment to a just and liberated future for both women and the working class. In Mary's afterlife as a left-wing icon for Dundee, she has often been imagined as an honorary male figure. Her struggle to synthesize and feminize socialism is erased in pursuit of appropriating her as a local hero of generic, gender-agnostic socialism, a politic that, gallingly, looks suspiciously like the hyper-masculinized vision of class struggle she fought so hard against. Of course, this is true of lionized women across the global anti-capitalist movement. Kollontai, Luxemburg, and Davis are imagined as no more three-dimensional than the banners upon which their faces are printed. For left-wing women who embrace their pursuit of feminism more flagrantly, it is often their communism that is erased by those in the political mainstream who seek to aesthetically co-opt them. To be a left-wing woman, then, seems to necessarily mean that one's politics will always be invalidated, never allowed to be both a woman and a communist. This book, in its attempt to secure for Mary Brooksbank the recognition she is due, ought to be the first entry into a campaign to give radical women the place they are owed in the historical record, as organizers, as communists, and as women. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Now, I'm very excited that we have Ruth Ewan with us today. And the image we see here, this is one of the artworks that Ruth has created, inspired by Mary Brooksbank. And we're very lucky to have others reproduced in the book as well, so that's another reason to make sure you get your copy before you leave tonight. But Ruth is an artist based in Glasgow whose work addresses ideas of power and questions representations of time, rebellion and repression. And Ruth is going to come and share some more words from Mary Brooksbank with us.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for coming along tonight. It's a real honour to be invited to be part of this book, which I think is long overdue for the recognition of Mary and her life and work. Mary is someone who I've continued to be drawn back to, I would say, for the last 10 years since I first showed some of my work at DCA with an exhibition, Brank and Heckle. And every time I return to Mary's words and Mary's writing, I'm sorry to say they feel more and more relevant as the years go by. And I'm going to read you, and rather than read from my own chapter in the book, I'm going to read from Mary's autobiography and use a little bit of artistic license to just merge a couple of little sections together, because I couldn't decide which part to read, because it's all so good. Okay, so the the first section I want to read from is called In Desperate Straits. If you rose one morning, not a bite of food in the house, and with only 3 shillings to keep 2 people going all week, what would you do? Off my borough money, I had paid the rent, insurance, and bought a bag of coal. My husband was ill, the situation was desperate. I lay for a long time wondering and worrying. Should I? Could I? Would I? Deciding that I would, I went off for rolls and made a cup of tea. I lost no time, for if I once hesitated, my courage would desert me. Off I went over to Newport in the Fifey, then walked the 3 miles or so to Tayport, for I sang in the streets that Saturday, walking up one street and down another. No one will ever know what it cost me to make a start, but in no time at all people came out to listen. I remember the sound of my own voice startled me to begin with. They sent their bairns with money, and I eventually came to a back lane where I got a good few shillings. As I was going away, one kindly woman asked whether I would like a cup of tea. I thanked her for it, and I was glad to sit down and rest. She asked no questions, but only said, I can see you're no use to that creature. I was too choked up with emotion to answer her. Aye, you're a richt bonny singer, she remarked. I was quite nicely dressed in my brown suede jerkin and pleated green skirt. I thanked her once again and made my way to Newport Road, because I could walk smartly in those days. There lies a quiet little cemetery that slopes down to the river. It was nice and quiet and peaceful. I washed my face at the little well and sat down to think, taking the chance to count the money I got. I was surprised to see that I had 32 shillings in pieces, single shillings, 6pences, threepennies, and pennies. I was swear to leave. From where I sat, I could see across the river to where I lived. I thought to myself, I hope my mother does not call before my return. I saw the boat coming over from Dundee, but by the time I got to the Newport War Memorial, it was on its way back. I sat down and I did a lot of thinking. I went in the saloon on the trip across as I felt averse to mingling with the other passengers. On reaching Dundee, I hurried home and showed Ernest the money. I told him what I had done. He exclaimed, for God's sake, never do that again. But what will you not do when you're in such desperate straits? I must end my story now, although there is so much more to tell. I have often been asked, why do you bother? Why don't you make something of yourself? And why can't you do as others do? The answer is because I am me. I am no hypocrite. I can't pretend to love our enemies. I prefer to fight them. I know full well the forces we are up against. Such as me would never be allowed to get anywhere. I have been told many a time, if you would only hold your tongue, to speak out against the warmongers and expose the corrupt administration, national and local, is not being discreet, and I have never been able to keep in with the right people. I may not be a fly woman, but I have grown wise enough to know that my atheism, striking as it does as the main prop and pillar of the establishment, debars me from any hope of gaining any recognition whatsoever, even if I wish to do so, which I do not. I have never had any personal ambitions. I have but one, to make my contribution to help destroy the capitalist system, and that is why I do not hold my tongue.
Thank you, Ruth. That's just a fantastic passage. Now, in not too long a time, we will invite you to come and join us in the foyer, where you can get a book, join us for a refreshment and have an informal chat with the authors. And I'd also like to mention the authors who have not been able to make it today. Abertay Historical Society's own Kenneth Baxter, Caroline Brown, archivist at the University of Dundee, and also Sheena Wellington, whose stories of Mary are brought into the book in a chapter written by Siobhan. But before we let you come up and get your hands on the book, then I am absolutely delighted that we have Stuart Brown joining us today. Now, Stuart is one of the founder members of the Dundee band, the Lowland Folk Four, later known as Lowland Folk. He's also a writer, a playwright, and just a general legend of Dundee. And Stuart is going to share with us some of his memories of Mary, and also I believe we will be treated to a cameo from Anne Brown as well, who's also here, who's going to join Stuart in a song to send us away from the formal part of this evening with. So Stuart Brown.
Hi everybody. Look, the first thing I was going to say was how honoured and privileged I feel to have had the chance to pay tribute to someone who I'd admired for so long, and whose music had been such an important influence on my life. But I've got another thing to be honoured about, because I think I'm the only one on the platform that actually knew Mary and met her, and I'm really, really pleased about that. But so how did I get to know Mary? Well, to explain that, we have to go back to 1966. Early in that year, our family folk band, which has already been named the Lowland Folk Four at that time, we were asked by the BBC to take part in a television programme to mark the opening of the new Tay Road Bridge. The programme was called The Road to Dundee. The thing was, we found that nobody knew anything about Dundee. There was the media, Scottish media, was Glasgow, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, and everything went over Dundee, bypassed Dundee. And the BBC had suddenly become aware of that. So the idea behind the show was to convey in song and story something of the unique character of the town and the people. We felt okay with that. We knew loads of whaling songs. The Old Balena was our signature tune. As for children's street songs, well, we had a huge medley of them, with classics like El Tel Bobby and There's a Manny in Your Bogey, Mary Ann. Of course, the programme director, a man who went by the name of W. Gordon Smith, some of you people may remember that name, because he also directed the great series The Hoot Nanny Show on Scottish television. Anyway, his thing was, the main thing he wanted to know about was the jute industry. And we got quite excited about that because, well, it gave us a perfect excuse to get the chance to meet the great Mary Brooksbank. And we happened to have a friend who was a friend of Mary's. So we turned to him. His name is Morris Fleming, really nice chap. He fixed up for us to go and visit Mary in her house at the east end of the Kingsway. So we turned up there. Mary greeted us with great warmth, and then, this is 1966, and I tried to remember the details, and in the book that we're launching today, I've tried to capture that, what was really like that day meeting. I remember a bright, sunlit living room. I remember her book, the Sidlaw Breezes, was lying on the table, and we got it, we opened it up, and we sang. We went through some of the songs. There was one, there was a juter and a batner sailing up the Tay, and the wives in Foundry Lane are singing blithe today. There'll be pennies for the bairns, a pint for Jock and Tam, money for the pictors, the old folk get a drap. We'll gie the sex the go by, you canna shoe with it. And 5 for 25, all no bare knuckle meat. We'll hae picnics to the stannery, get our clays out the pot. We'll gather wogs and boil them in a corned beef can. So I said to her, we'd love to sing that one, Mary, on the programme, on the show. And she said, well, sing it. What do you mean? She said, it's easy, it's just wee Willie Winky. And we suddenly realised, there's the Jute round the bat, or sailing up the tail, you know. So, but now the ironic thing was, we went to show that into the big rehearsals, the recording of the show, and W. Gordon Smith, the director, went, no, don't sing that. What you should do is, before you stand in a line, and just go, there's a Juter in the back, they're sailing up the Tay. Next one. And the waves in Foundry Lane, and that's the way we actually did it on the show. Anyway, sorry, I have to digress off this. It's supposed to be full. Anyway, the most vivid memory of that day with Mary was her own powerful singing of the world-renowned Jute Mill Song. We had a version of it. In fact, we just recorded it with we had an album with EMI, and we had this record, this song on it. And our version of it was all lyrical and almost a plea for sympathy. That's what, you know, I hate to say that, but that's what it was like. Mary sang it to us. It was a different kettle of fish altogether. And I keep remembering those heartfelt lines that say so much about Mary's life and the beliefs. Oh dear me, the world's ill divided. Them that work the hardest are the least provided. It was an impressive moment. It was a serious moment. But you know, Mary had a very wicked sense of humour, and there was a lot of laughter that day. Especially when we got to talking about the hijinks of a mill wedding. Back then, I was a starry-eyed trainee journalist with DC Thompson. My route to work each day took me down King Street, Princes Street first, then King Street, past Baxter's Jute Mill. She laughed so heartily when I told her about a particular day when I was swept up by a tidal wave of Gallus Mill lasses, marching along, ringing bells, singing defiantly. Beside me at the heart of all this was the blushing bride, dressed up in net curtains, in a wheelbarrow, being wheeled along. I don't know if it was more embarrassed or me. I was right in the middle of all this. And Mary thought that I was a hoot. But you don't forget things like that. You don't forget happenings like that. Nor do you forget occasions like that momentous meeting with Mary. So to celebrate that day, I'm going to finish by singing another of her timeless songs, The Spinner's Wedding, just to remind me of that day when I got in golf. To do that, I'm going to ask my dear wife, Anne, if she would kindly join me up here. Is this mic picking up okay?
Yeah.
What was it? The roadies are not the same as they used to be. We'll try it with the mic.
Let me know if you want it switched off or anything.
I don't know. Right. Okay. Now this song's got a really good chorus. Now it's the beginning of the weekend. So we'll teach you the chorus and you can all join in and get your weekend after a cheery start. It goes, hooray, hello, adadio, hooray, hello, adadio, hooray, hello, adadio, Jessie's getting married, oh, the gal's looking worried, the flats are in the steer, Jessie Brody's getting married in the morn shall know ye hear. Hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, Jessie's getting married, oh. The helper and the piecer, they went in the tube last night to buy a wee bit present for to make her hemlook. Hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, Jessie's getting married, oh. They bought a genie tea set and a chanty foo of salt, a wee bit coloured carpet, a kettle and a pot. Hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, Jessie's getting married, oh. The spinners there are singing, the weavers dancing too, the gaffers standing watching, but there's nothing ye can do. Come on. Hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, Jessie's getting married, oh. Now I'm gonna, Mary won't mind, I know you won't, Mary. I'm gonna add a little verse of my own, and you'll know why. We a good maid out the curtains and wellies on her feet. We'll put her in the party and go singing in the street. And then we bells are ringing, the hill tune will hear the sound. We'll tie a tail lampy and go dancing round and round. Hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o. Hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, Jessie's getting married, oh. Yourself at the eye, you lasses, standing at your spinning frame. May I have fallen plenty in your wee bit aim. You'll know McMuckle's sir, no matter who you try, but poured you love and loyalty that money canna buy. Last time, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, hooray, hurrah, a daddy-o, Jessie's getting married, oh.
That was just wonderful. Thank you so much, Stuart and Anne, for that song. Now, if you'll just give us, we'll take a couple of minutes getting our books out and arranged, but please do start coming out into the foyer. If you're an Abertay Historical Society member, you can collect the book to which your membership entitles you tonight. If you're not an Abertay Historical Society member, please consider becoming one, but also books are available for purchase, including other titles from previous years as well, and there are plenty of refreshments as well. So yeah, please join us in the foyer where you can have a chat to some of the speakers, and thank you all very much for coming.